emotional. And when that is invoked, sometimes it's hard to have discussions about it. So, one of the things I wanted to do today is to explore how we might better do that, how we might better have a conversations with about difficult things. I think you can appreciate why, especially in our today, but that's because we are here today. Uh, those discussions are very important, and the success of having those discussions are very important. So we're going to try to explore that, and I'm going to do something we call crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing means uh, we're going to put it out there, and we're going to like let the ideas fight as opposed to us. Put some ideas out and see how uh, we might discover a new way or a different way to engage in a conversation about difficult things. So I guess I'll pause here and say, is there any, um, did I confuse you, or is it understandable what we're trying to do? Are there questions, um, comments? Okay, well, seeing that there are none, hearing no objections, we'll let's move forward. Okay, so I would think the first question is, what do you want to accomplish when you engage in a conversation, especially a conversation about something that is controversial? What is it that you would like to accomplish, uh, or what's the return on your investment? You're going to invest some time, some energy. It might even, in some rare occasion, people actually go and research the topic so as to be more familiar with it. Um, what is it? What is it that you would like to? Some things, because it might probably are more than one thing. What is examples of things that you would like to accomplish when you engage in a conversation?
I like to plant a seed and
Plant a seed.
understand that it is sometimes not my job to water said seed,
Mm,
because I know that um, we are all here together, and we all need to work together to be able to stay here. I mean, we only have one planet, right? Where else are we going to go? Because they sure aren't going to let us on that ship that they got there. Mm-mm.
we may not want to get on the ship because when they get there, the asteroid might hit that too. So we
Yeah.
might want to stay off that ship. They don't really know where they're going. We know where we are.
And what do they say? You take you with you.
You
You
take
have
it with
to
you.
you
Exactly.
have to be able to not have those same things happen on the ship. I digress. I I know that everything is balanced on everything else. So for me, one of the first things that I work at consciously is to give people grace, give myself grace, and give people grace.
Mhm, mhm. I might uh, point you to the chat because it's easy to overlook that. We're going to be pretty much following the questions if you look in the chat. So that'll give you some time too to be thinking about the questions. So you might want to take a look at that, um, to, because that's kind of where we're going with this. Okay. And there'll be some other questions too that will arise just because of your answers. Okay. So, anyone else, what is it that you're trying to accomplish uh, in a discussion? Naima says planting a seed. Anyone else?
Well, I mean, just basically a lot of times it's just understanding. I mean, and that is from the very like lightest surface down to something maybe as personal as it can be, right? That's a big span. But to function in groups or in communities or even families or as big as societies requires some understanding, right? And what I find, I mean, in my element is that I'm in that spot a lot. And it's hard for me to break, having lived in one place for a very long time and then being uprooted into a very diverse community that, I always feel like I'm really working hard to understand others, but going forward on that, I find that people have to work a whole lot probably harder to understand me because of that fact that they've lived in international communities longer than I have, and so I have mannerisms. I'm loud and kind of not in your face, but it's just more expressive. Like my volume's higher and I'm turned up more than just when I'm really engaged. Sometimes I'm just being loud almost. And so that's, I think, for understanding, we look for understanding our communication, but also how we communicate. That whole thing about you bring you with you,
yeah,
is so true. And so I mean, and sometimes that's the difficult part of conversation, is to kind of reel yourself back and really try to think, how am I communicating to this person? It's the whole thing of, do I understand what I think you hear me saying, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So understanding, yeah.
Understanding. Okay. Planting a seed, understanding. Jace DeCory says to use your brain in a good way. That's an interesting one. Interesting one. She put that in the chat. Man, if you don't feel comfortable talking, let's say, and you want to put something in the chat, your answer in the chat, please do that. We'll try to communicate your thoughts. Anyone else? An idea? Why do you even bother to engage with someone in a controversial subject in a discussion?
Well, I think for me, can you hear me?
Yes.
In recent times, I'm hoping to find common ground, because I think there's more division than there's ever been in my life. And so I think I'm looking for some reassurance when I engage. But I'm also apprehensive because I'm afraid of what I might learn. Because for the first time really in my life, I think I find what I think of as the other point of view to be intolerable. So I'm not always very hopeful about negotiation. If I'm talking to an old friend or relative, I'm wondering, I'm not going to make any explicit political statements here, but I'm wondering, I'm afraid of what I might learn about what that person thinks and feels. And if my worst fear is confirmed, then how do I proceed? I'm not a person who thinks he has all the answers, but I also have maybe a clearer sense of right and wrong than I've ever had, given what's been going on in the last several years. And I find some perspectives just intolerable. So when I encounter that in an old friend or a relative, what next? I'm looking for some answers here for us. What I have mostly is questions about that. I'm going to have lunch with my best friend from high school before too
Mm.
long. And that'll be good. We haven't been together for many years.
Mm.
But I also have some reason to believe that he might hold those opinions that I think of as intolerable.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do with that as we sit there over our salad and whatever, just retreat to discussion of the mundane, or try to talk to him about my concerns about the way he feels. I'm not 100% sure that's going to be the case, but I'm pretty sure that's what's going to be there. And so I'm kind of worried about how I might proceed. So I just have questions, Lawrence, and interested in hearing what you think about situations like that.
Mhm. Mhm. Interesting. Interesting. Ryan is saying that he's quoting F. Scott Fitzgerald in saying that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function.
Well, that works. That works if you think the two opposing ideas are at least arguable.
Yes, right. Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't work when you think that the opposing idea is not only absurd but dangerous.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think that it seems like it's certainly almost necessary, you can say, to discount some ideas as unworkable. They may be an idea, and you can respect it as an idea, but not one that's particularly useful depending on one's goal. You know, for example, if someone's goal is to destabilize the country, then the idea that they have to do that is workable based on that objective. But if your objective is to keep a stable a society and one that works for everyone, then that idea goes into the loony box, you know, because, you know, why would I entertain that idea? You know, but I can respect that it is an idea, but the objective is not one that's desirable, and I can put it in that cage.
Can't, you know, in that case, sometimes I can't, I not only can't respect the idea, but it angers me.
Mm, mm.
Yet I know there's no possibility if I just turn away. But sometimes I'm wondering recently if there are any possibilities if I don't.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think it's hard to give up on people, especially those that you love. At least for me, it's hard to give up even on the people I don't have a particular attachment to other than their humanity, because I hate to give up on people, you know? So I had to create a special box for those people, you know, kind of like the timeout box in kindergarten or something like that. I know you're having a bad day. I'm not sure what to do about your bad day, but what we don't want it to do is to make a bad day for everybody else. So you get to be in the timeout box, you know, until we can figure out a better thing to do with you. And right now the conditions aren't such that we can pay attention to only you, you know. So it's not that we don't like you, not that we hate you, but we're trying to like not let you infect everyone else with whatever you have going on in your mind. But we'll get back to you. You know, we won't forget you. We won't leave you out there. So I'm still thinking about some of those people and what do you do with them? Well, you know, what do you do about that relationship rather than just sort of cast them adrift in their own boat and on their own raft into the sea of nothingness, you know? Um, yeah, then that's probably as much about maintaining my own humanity as having empathy for them. Because what I do to them, I do to myself. I always recognize that whatever reasoning I can find, whatever I do to them, I know I'm doing to myself. So the question is, how do I best handle it? And most of the time I haven't figured it all out, but if I sweep that dirt under the rug, I know it's the dirt, it ain't going away. It's still there, you know? So there are many comments in the chat box. I think we'll try to get to some of them, but in the meantime, are there other things? It's much easier if people just say them, partially because I'll remind people I am dyslexic. So it may seem like I'm reading the stuff, but it means probably I've read it 2 or 3 times, and then I have kind of know what it says, and I probably will misquote somebody a few times too. Yeah.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I have a comment.
Sure. Go ahead.
So, you know, this is a really interesting conversation because, you know, I do a lot of community work. And like last night I was engaged in a conversation with talking about a business idea. And I didn't really agree with it because of my reasons, but I came across as being negative. And so one of the ladies in the meeting said, "Oh, we won't have any negativity here." And I said, you know, I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just trying to give pros and cons of this business proposal. Because when we are thinking about proposals such as this, a multi-million-dollar decision, I think we have to have pros and cons. So as far as conversations, sometimes it feels as though you just want to, you get so kind of discouraged. And I think that happens to a lot of people in community when they get treated like that. You know, like, oh, if everybody is for this proposal and it sounds outlandish to one, then they get ostracized at the group. And then pretty soon it's like, well, I'm not even going to say anything anymore because it happens. So we really have to be, I think listening is a big part. I mean, like it's like 90% of conversation. I think being able to listen and have that open mind. Because I mean, I've been in working with community, involved in tribal politics. Having conversations that are meaningful are very, very difficult because right away people in my community seem like they're on defense a lot of the time. You know, they're on the defense mode. And if you don't like their idea or agree with their idea, then right now there's a war and you're the enemy. And so instead, you know, that's the greatest challenge, is just trying to listen to someone's idea and also say, okay, we can't make anybody do anything, right? So we have to I always try and speak from the heart. I speak my truth, and you know, if they don't like it or they don't accept it, that's on them, that's not on me. At least I can go home and sleep at night, you know. So, and I'm not going to toss and turn and lose sleep over it because I feel good. I'm like, hey, yeah, you know what? I needed to say that. And I said it, and it's out there. It's out there in the universe. And I said my piece, so I'm good. So I think that is just the biggest, you know, I think that's the biggest challenge too for me, and having conversations and just trying to have conversations with people who don't really know how to have a conversation, you know, being able to leave a situation or a meeting both with agreeing to disagree, I guess they say sometimes. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And that leads actually to our next question. And I want you to keep in mind the first question, because that always is kind of at the bottom of these kind of meaningful discussions. You know, it's kind of like, if you don't know where you're going, then a map is not going to take you there. You know, it's like the map is not going to be of much use. So figuring out how to do something when you don't know really what am I trying to do, that can be difficult. And depending on what you're trying to get out of it will depend on how you approach having a meaningful conversation. You know, for example, if you just want to explore something, then you can get in your exploratory frame of mind and just kind of ask open questions, uh, listen, and just accept for the person, whatever a person says, as just this is what I'm saying, what they said, and no more than that. It doesn't have to rise to an opinion or an actionable thing because you're just exploring. On the other hand, if you're trying to make a decision on something, then the discussion, it takes on a whole different point of view. You know, it takes on a whole different approach. So keep that first question in mind. But to Crystal's comment, uh, she brought up, you know, like there are impediments to having meaningful conversations. And I'd like to explore with all of you for a few moments, what are some of the impediments or things that make it difficult to have um, meaningful conversations? Uh, Crystal brought up that, you know, sometimes people are, you know, let's say they're touchy, you know, about the thing, and the, that can be an impediment. What are some of the other things that can make it difficult for you to have a meaningful conversation with someone, especially about a difficult or controversial topic?
I will say, and this is Betty, I will say that I'm thinking of, for instance, needing or wanting to have a meaningful conversation with just one other person. That for me, when I have approached such a thing, it's often taken me a long time to work up my courage, because it's something that I view as really sensitive, perhaps to our relationship. So one impediment, of course, is not knowing whether I will even be heard or how the other person will react. May just shut it down right now, not with the answer I was hoping for. So that probably can be expanded to other situations, but that comes to me right offhand.
Mhm. Okay. The sensitivity. I think Charles alluded to that kind of thing before. You know, the difficulty of maybe discovering that what that person's answer was that's going to create new problems for you, because now you have to face who that person is, at least at that moment, you know, or who they present as. And whereas you know, their family or friends or something, suddenly you have to reevaluate that whole relationship. Maybe we don't want to know that that person has such kind of views, or they see the world in that way, right? Maybe, and as Betty is saying, I think that takes courage. You know, it takes courage to go into that space. It also takes courage to act on that, you know, because now you have to explore, well, what is it? What is it that I can do now? What am I willing to say? Well, you know, I'm going to avoid this person. Do I tell them straight out, don't call me anymore, and I won't call you? I never want to see you again, you know? And what is, you know, how does that affect your life? Because you probably have some of the same circles, people in the same circles. And when you say, look, I don't want to see you again, that means you may be writing off all the rest of those people too, because that person's going to be coming to parties or something, or gatherings with that person. It may mean leaving a church that you have an investment in, because you realize that person holds that view, and you never want, and if the other people in that church also hold that view and they agree with him, you don't want to be a part of that either. Those are difficult discussion, you know, things to discover. And as Charles alluded to, we may not want to go there, you know, so that could be uh, uh, an impediment to having a meaningful conversation, is that we don't really want to hear what the other person has to say.
To follow that, I come from a background of what I term now passive aggressive behavior, which is sort of rampant, I think, on the plains and maybe everywhere, where we don't say the truth. We don't talk about religion and politics. Well, now is the time, if ever there is one, that these things need to be discussed among us. And so that's the basis of my trepidation, I think. And I'm the first one in my immediate family to take the bull by the horns and speak up about things. But now that I've gotten through that and they haven't abolished me or banished me to the back part of the acreage, which we don't have. But anyway, it becomes easier, sort of, but it can really lead to calamity. So it's not easily resolved.
You know, it's interesting, Betty, because I discovered this some time ago, that if I met a friend and that friend comes from a racist family, what I didn't recognize is that for that person to accept me as a friend, he had to abandon his whole family. And that's deep. That's asking a lot of a person. It's also maybe all of his friends, everybody he knows, because those people would consider him a race traitor, right? So that person may be okay, but to ask him to accept me or just to expect that he would respect me as a human being is asking him to abandon all the people that he loves, right? Now, and it's easy for me to say, well, you know, they're not worth it. But if that's all you got, that, you know, that's asking a lot. And the question is, if that person does that to be friends with me, am I going to take the responsibility to always fold him into my friendship, right? Am I going to, is there anything I can do to make, you know, so that he hasn't lost everything, that he, if he loses that, he's going to get something else? Am I going to stand up for him with my friends and say, look, you either have to accept him or you abandon me, you know, or I'm abandoning you, you know? Am I willing to do the same thing and create that space? Or am I just handing him the coals to hold in his hand, the hot coals to hand in his hand, and he suffers and I'm okay? You know, am I willing to suffer with that person for that, you know, for the courage that he took to sacrifice what he had, you know, to accept me as a friend? Those are the things that, you know, sort of pop up, and those dilemmas can pop up and make it difficult for us to have meaningful conversations just because we don't want to be in the position of having to make those kind of decisions, which are tough ones to make. So any other impediments that you found to having a meaningful conversation?
Lynn, did you want to say something? I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, if I could. Um, Hello, everybody. I just I'm kind of like thinking in my mind that a conversation is like real estate. It's all about location, location, location. And no matter where you're at, that's a location. The subject changes within 15 to 20 miles. Whether you're on the reservation or you're off the reservation. That's all about location. And when you change location, I find in myself being raised by white people, being Black and Indian. I travel in 3 different worlds. And my conversations change within sometimes 2 minutes. The tone of my voice, the presentation of the clothes I wear. It's all about where you're at, what you're doing, and your tone of voice. Now, I want to bring something up about Faith, South Dakota, and their slave auction. I've rodeoed in South Dakota all my life, and I've been appalled for the last 6 years that here in South Dakota, we are having slave branding auctions to raise money for a high school rodeo association. I am just totally offended with the political racial climate going on in the country right now, South Dakota, I called the governor's office. I told Christie what I thought. I've been, I'm through. I'm just up to here in my neck with this stuff. And people, I did a piece that I wrote. It's called Driving in the Rear View Mirror. White people in South Dakota don't know what I'm talking about because they never have to do that. People of color in South Dakota do it every day. So there again, I'm not mad at anybody. I'm just talking about when I have a conversation with South Dakotans, it's about where I'm at. And that's all I had to say. Other than that, I'm just listening.
Mhm.
Hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.
Good. Well, and thank you for that words of wisdom, or that perspective, because I think that those are perspectives that need to be shared with everyone. Are there other impediments? I can think of a few just to maybe loosen up that conversation, because I think that's it. These are kind of key things. One is definition of terms. People who are one of the reasons we talk past each other is because we are using words that have different meanings to the conversants. So one person, for a good example is someone will say a word like racist, and for one person it means, like, well, let's say in my case, it means anybody who accepts the concept of race. If you think that they're a racist, to me, you are a racist. You are a person who based your philosophy and framework and how you think about people around race. So, but then another person might think, well, no, a racist is somebody who ties somebody to the back of a pickup truck and drags them till their bones fall off, like has actually happened. That was actually a thing, you know. They call it, if it falls below that standard, that's not racism to them, right? So we can be using the same word and have different meanings, because words in themselves don't have intrinsic meaning, and there are all kinds of examples to demonstrate that, but they don't have intrinsic value, intrinsic meaning. The meaning only happens when the person who's speaking and the person who's hearing attaches the same meaning to the word. And in a strange kind of way, that's darn near impossible, because the words, even if we accept the dictionary meaning, our life story puts in nuance. Our life story and our own experiences shapes even the dictionary meaning of the word. So by the time we've used 1,000 words, the potential for misunderstanding is great. So I find that a functional impediment to a meaningful conversation. Has anyone else had an experience with that leads them, or a conversation that has exposed any other kind of impediment, things that block having a meaningful conversation, that trip you up? You mean to have it, but it's not happening. Anyone else have examples?
Well, I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
This whole year, cause and effect. There's a fear, like Charles was saying, and there's a fear of loss. There is a fear of making someone angry. There is fear. The understanding of words, like you're saying, the person's personal story means a lot, a whole lot. Even like Lynn was saying, going from this place to another place, the weather, the so on. There's so many things, and there's fear that somebody's going to get angry. You have a lot of people that are here, and then there are people that are here, and the people that are here make sure that the people down there understand that they are there. And people, there's especially in South Dakota sometimes, there's a real fear of being fired if there's a conversation that's being spoken and there's an agreement that's being spoken. So that fear is there. And then a lot of people don't want to deal with an angry person. That's why I was saying grace. Everybody's story is different. If you're working in the same job, things are a little bit different for you as opposed to your fellow worker. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are in there. It is a challenge. It is definitely a challenge.
Thank you. Todd, you were going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, you talked about ground rules. I think one of the most difficult things that have been in the past, few years is that this form of didactic arguing, kind of like, a yes, no, there's no, I mean, you have to have kind of the same reason you're having a conversation. You can't have one side trying to make their points to win a debate and the other person trying to find meaning or what, needs to be accomplished. And, I mean, we run into that. It's a little discouraging, but I think realistically, that's like the first thing you have to do, because I run into that all the time when I return home, and I just, when I have to set out and kind of guess, okay, what's this conversation about? You almost have to do kind of, for me, I want it to be about, understanding or whatever, but you can't have that all the time. And that's, it is discouraging a bit, but it's best at the start to try to determine it for yourself, so you can know what kind of, like, am I going to have a 30-second conversation and say, oh, well, that's interesting, and then, kind of check out, or are you going to actually get to communicating? And, I've always tried to argue on behalf of the person I don't agree with in my mind, so I can ask the questions that I'm asking naturally then. Like, well, yeah, okay, I get this, but why this? But if you're in a didactic argument, you can't do that. Because if you say, oh, I get that, they're like, oh, great. And it's just, it's frustrating.
1 point for me.
Yeah. And it's, and it gets to be, I mean, it is like Neema was talking about, a power thing. That's a power thing. Because it's like, if you don't agree with me, I'm going to sublimate your argument.
Yes.
And if you agree with me, it bolsters me up. It's like, there's only an empowerment for someone working in a didactic argument. Like, if you're with me, great, it makes me right. And if you're against me, I'm going to tell you how you're wrong. Yeah. I'm not going to go for anything beyond just you're wrong. And that's sometimes the most difficult part about, for me, discussions of, that have seemed to rise kind of in recent years. And it's hard to also not fall into that trap. Sometimes, because that emotional thing just zaps you sometimes. You get mad, like, rapidly if it's something that's offensive. And you want to jump into that, like you are, you want to talk about wrong, but it does no good. You're just kind of yelling at each other then.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Very interesting. Yeah. Very interesting comments. Anyone else find something else that maybe, the landmines to a meaningful conversation, things that trip it up and make it more difficult?
This is just a kind of a personal landmine, and I guess I have the luxury, since I'm retired and don't work outside my home. Everything I do is kind of my own choosing, and I'm afraid I choose to only interact with people that I know mostly agree with me. And I think that's kind of an impediment to leading a good life. But meanwhile, I'm so selfish, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of impediment too, Betty, and that you bring out. And that's one where, if we stay in our cocoon, our ability to see other perspectives diminish. You know, the more we're talking to our twin in the crib, the less we're able to talk to anybody outside the crib. You know, so those become an interesting kind of impediment. Anyone else discover some things that make it difficult to have meaningful conversations?
I think I am late. Excuse me, I have to say that. I just came from the memory care. And I got you in the car and I just came in the house, but I only heard part of it. So if I have said something that somebody else has, I'm sorry. But an impediment, and I was just kind of glancing at the front newspaper today, the Argus, and what our governor said, well, yeah, those people can come in, but they aren't going to change me. Coming with the preconcept notion that you have a closed mind, or people have a closed mind, rather than truly having a genuine interest of what the other person's background is and how their opinions have been formed as a means of the reason that you are conversing with them, and giving the others respect for their knowledge of something, rather than thinking, I'm going to change them. You do not change anyone. They change themselves. And I think that impediment is that state of mind when you have a conversation. And I agree with Betty, who said that you enjoy being with people with the same opinions. And that, you know, birds of a feather flock together. Yes, that happens. But that does not mean that you shut out others, because they all have something to contribute. And you can learn from others.
Yes. Thank you, Lee. Anyone else? Oh, yeah. Anyone else have some ideas of things that create impediments for meaningful discussions? Well, keep thinking about that, because I think you'll start to come up with them, and it's kind of a prompt that going forward to pay attention to what kinds of things trip up and make it difficult for you to have a meaningful conversation. And then now let's look at some solutions, some potential solutions. What are some of the kind of things we've heard? Some kind of impediments. What are some of the kinds of things that can help us to overcome those impediments? What can we do?
I have a few suggestions.
Sure.
So one of the things, so I've been trained by I've been to several leadership trainings, Bush Foundation, Building Healthy Native Communities. So one of the things that I've learned in my training is setting before the and this has already been mentioned, but setting that healthy space for a conversation. And that usually what I'll do is, if I'm hosting any meetings that have conversations, what I like to do is I start with a prayer. I start with 3 volunteers. I ask one person to say a prayer. I ask one person to volunteer a story, a short story, and I ask one person to volunteer a song, to sing a song. It could be any song. And so if I'm creating that big conversation, I want to try and put everybody at ease, to know that this is a safe place to have the conversation. You can ask your questions. No questions are too dumb. No questions are stupid. Anything you want to know, we are here to learn from each other. So I think setting that good space even with our loved ones in private conversation, we acknowledge that. And I think Todd mentioned that, acknowledging together that, okay, so we're going to talk about this situation that we're in. So let's, here's our group rules, for example, but maybe you could use another word, group agreements, and saying that, I'm going to listen to you and then you listen to me. There's all different kinds, like people, when you speak to each other, sit face to face, like knee to knee, and just, if you're having that kind of conversation with someone, you could do that. And you could say, okay, I'm first, and then I'll get 5 minutes or whatever. Let me say my piece, and then you could say your piece. It takes a lot of work to do that. But it's better for your spirit than, having an ugly conversation with someone and then walking away feeling ugly, like, oh, now I got to smudge myself off because it just feels creepy. And I've had a lot of those, walking away from those ugly conversations and like, oh, what just happened there? And you leave a big meeting and things are said. So I think that's a good part of it. And I don't really see it as like an impediment. Like, if you want to stay, if you want to be a bird of a feather, you flock together. That's okay. These things are okay. If that's what makes your spirit and your soul happy, more power to you. If you want to step out into that big world of having these, these other conversations that maybe you don't believe in, I don't know, your religion or politics, all those things are like no-nos. I've known that since I was a little girl. It's like, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion. So, we're kind of like, now is the time, and our world is changing. This last year pandemic, we come out, we're coming out, we're emerging, like, I kind of feel like we're emerging from our cocoon, and we're like being butterflies, and we're trying to figure out, okay, how can life is short. We could be, people have gotten sick and they just die from not only corona, but other things. So I think it's time we just come back and, really have that listening as part of that solution, and not holding your grudges or your beliefs onto someone else. Recognize that those are your beliefs. We don't, we could share our beliefs, but we don't hate somebody because they don't agree with us, or somebody who's wrong. I can't, like, one of the ladies said, you can't change anybody, right? We're not here to change anybody, because you try to change somebody. Look how change is difficult for ourselves. We try to change somebody else, it's just going to create you grief. So all you can do is offer your good words and hope that maybe they'll pick up on one or two, and then you take care of yourself, and meditation, all this kind of stuff. It's kind of like a whole lifestyle thing, is the way I think about having those good, meaningful conversations. And just at the end, just maybe shaking hands or bumping fists, or, just greeting each other and saying, well, you know what, thank you, because I did learn a lot. You opened my mind to some new things. So saying things like that are important. So thank you.
You bet. You bet. Excellent. Excellent. Lots of good ideas there. Anyone else have something to contribute in terms of a strategy to get over some of the impediments that were expressed before, or that you have thought of after that? Any other solutions? Well, I'll throw out some and keep thinking about, what kind of solutions. One of the solutions I find, I raised the issue earlier, that we often don't have the same meanings for words. And I find it's useful to ask people, what do you mean by this word? This is what I mean when I say that, but I'm not sure that we have the same meaning for that word. This is what I mean. What do you mean, when you use this word? When, for example, I'll go back to the racist thing. If someone says, well, I'm not a racist, then my next question is, well, how do you define a racist? Maybe because if depending on how they define it, they aren't or are. depending on how they define it. So, and then explore that idea. And then you might say, okay, well, that's interesting, and I hadn't thought of that, or I don't think about it in that way. But how about in this case? Is this person, give some examples and say, well, would you say a person is a racist if they do this? And if so, why? And if not, why not? Because I find that does a couple of things. One, it does challenge people. And sometimes I will say that sometimes, maybe often, people will get angry because it's the first time they realize that they don't know for themselves what they mean by that word. Because most of us don't look up most of the words that we use in the dictionary. And the dictionary itself, it only says this is what seems to be meant by most people when they use this word. Because you'll realize that if you look in the dictionary, there are often lots of meanings to a word, but many people in one region will be familiar with one of the regions, but one of the definitions, but completely unfamiliar with the others, because in their region, that's what it means. And in their country, even, because many countries speak English as a first language. And in those countries, for example, in England, a fag is the word for a cigarette, but not in America, So if you say in England, you say, hey, would you give me a fag? That's a lot different if you say that in America, but it's a very common thing to say in English. So words have different meanings. So it's useful. I find one of the things that's useful for a conversation is to define terms and ask people and help. And also another thing is kind of along the same lines, is to help people to articulate their idea, because often people find it difficult to say what they mean. So rather than challenge what they mean, help them to flesh out what they mean by asking them questions, by asking them like, okay, when you say this is what I'm hearing. Is that what you're saying? Like, let me feed that back to you. And because one, it honors them to say, hey, I'm listening to you. And I take, I value what you're saying, but I'm not sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. So help me to understand that. And that's a very good phrase to get used to, is, would you help me to understand blah, 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 blah? Would you help me to understand how this situation happens, would you help me to understand how your point of view would reconcile these two things, right? Because often they're presented with new information that they have no idea, they haven't had life experiences for that to raise a question, and for that question to put stress on their idea. And lacking that stress of ideas will often make it so that people's ideas are poorly formed and they're not very strong. And when people have a weak idea, they're likely to defend them emotionally because they can't rationally, And so that's the only thing they have left. I think the fear of loss was addressed earlier, and people do have a sense, they have loss aversion. That's part of being human. And to lose an idea or find something that was a keystone in your sense of framing the universe, that's a very destabilizing thing that people undergo, no matter how, maybe they should lose it. It's like having a rotten tooth. It may hurt to pull that tooth, but you're either going to do that or you're going to have gangrene of the jaw. Take your pick, So those are a couple of things. There are lots more, but we're not going to cover them all in an hour. But I want to hear if there are any parting things, since we're coming up on our hour now. Todd?
Yeah, I just want to there's one thing you talk about there about beliefs, which is really a key element in this, because that's where a lot of the fear comes in, that you're going to be attacked on your beliefs, or, and one thing that I read this book here a year or so ago by Buster Benson, and it's called Why Are We Yelling? And he gets into this whole idea about how, you have to allow yourself to kind of believe things maybe you aren't ready to believe, as long as, it's a conversation, not a point back and forth thing, which is, and he gives his, the possibility that he believes in ghosts. He doesn't believe in ghosts, but he allows the possibility. And if you start from that point, you put yourself kind of in this place where you're vulnerable, but the conversation generally moves. Then you're not defensive, but you're also, it provides a kind of like a more open-ended questions, more kind of seeking, and it leads to discussion better places. And he actually, the author talked about, he would choose people he knew disagreed with him so he could practice this. And that's one thing I think we miss out on. And I know this is South Dakota, and South Dakota, it's so true, is that we miss out on that value of tough conversations a lot of times. There's a value to it. And it takes some practice. And there's just, it's not always easy to do, because there's not a lot of settings. I think, as mentioned earlier by Lynn, it's true. Setting is a big thing there. So I find myself practicing it when I can. And then it allows me to do it sometimes in places I couldn't have done it previously. Anyway, I just wanted to bring up that because it was an interesting concept that might help get rid of some of the fear.
Thank you.
What is the author's name of the book?
Buster Benson, I think is his name. Buster Benson. It's called Why Are We Yelling?
Excellent.
Well, my friends and co-conspirators, thank you very much for a lively conversation. We will continue next week with a conversation around grief. Grief is a very, it's part of what we have a hard time doing. One of the many things as humans that we will do, but we have a hard time doing it, and therefore we often neglect to prepare ourselves or prepare ourselves to deal with grief, and we often don't handle it well. So next week we're going to have a discussion about grief, and I hope that you will join us then. Until that time, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Same time, same station.